been nearly a week since Tony Khan announced that he has a major announcement. Well, hold up. Actually, this time it wasn't him making the announcement. It was actually Adam Cole. Anyway, the content of the announcement was to say that on June 26, AEW and New Japan Pro Wrestling will co-promote a super show called Forbidden Door from the United Center in Chicago. The melding of AEW and New Japan talent has been something on wrestling fans' wish lists since at least 2019. But this is 2022. And not only does everyone have a voice, we also tend to amplify the voices of those who spit out the most ridiculous takes. Chances are, if you've engaged in wrestling Twitter over the past week, you've encountered some version of the argument that the Forbidden Door might be a fun concept, but it does nothing to bring in new fans. Or as they're known as in wrestling discourse, the casual fans. Yes, the casual fans. If wrestling was politics, the casual fans would be the swing voters that get way too much attention in the lead up to a primary. That's definitely them. But if some on Twitter are to be believed, AEW is making a massive mistake in making an event that will only appeal to their base and not appeal in any way to that coveted casual audience. Now, before you accuse me of building a straw man, I should note that a lot of these takes have originated with people who are cozy with WWE. Now, unlike some former champions, I'm not going to claim that WWE is paying these influencers. I would never let that control my narrative. That's not what's happening here. But what is happening is that there are individuals with influential platforms that benefit from giving WWE favorable coverage. That's not a hot take. I think it's pretty obvious if you analyze things. And the framing of this debate serving WWE is crucial to further analyze the take. After all, before AEW existed, a lot of the discourse surrounded WWE and their inability to both keep their hardcore audience and draw new fans. Funny how the tables have suddenly turned. But that's a conversation from 2017. We can discard that along with the Roman needs to turn heel conversation. That's over. That's done with. Moving on. But what's not going away is the constant bickering online between the AEW and WWE hardcore fans. These people love their wrestling companies more than anyone loves anything. And given that we're in a time where we now have 2 national promotions in the US, each move gets judged not on its own merit, but on its relationship to its competition. And in 2022, major promotions cater to similar but distinct audiences. WWE, they're continuing their quest to become the Disney of people in spandex doing body slams. Meanwhile, AEW is a cross between the legacy of WCW and the remnants of the post-Monday Night War indie scene. And I gotta say, there's enough space for both products to exist, and they're both fairly healthy at the moment. And that's kind of the point of this video. Why is it that online wrestling fans have to debate the merits of the Forbidden Door show? It really just shows that this is a proxy battle between the AEW-WWE debate. And quite frankly, this specific argument is a really weird hill to die on. I mean, AEW has had their fair share of mishaps. Looking at you, Revolution 2021. Yikes. And honestly, it might not even be accurate. Let me explain. The implication of this criticism is that doing a show like Forbidden Door only attracts the customers that are already going to buy the product regardless. These are the taken for granted hardcore fans. Apparently, they have absolutely no agency and will buy anything a wrestling company sells them. Must be nice. The AEW White Knights on Twitter seem to be stuck in this notion that the only job of AEW is to attract new fans and not at all cater to that base. On its face, that's somewhat of a reasonable take. Obviously, AEW needs to grow its business. Every company does. And we have evidence that the last 2 boom periods in professional wrestling coincided with interest from people that weren't necessarily your typical wrestling fan. But that's also been over 20 years at this point. Speaking of 20 years ago, let's go back a little bit. It's no accident that some of the biggest successes on pay-per-view that WWE had post the Monday Night War were when they actually catered to that hardcore fan base. Back in 2001, the year that basically birthed the wrestling landscape for the next 2 decades, Steve Austin was in the middle of an ill-fated heel turn and pay-per-view numbers were in the toilet. Instead of gaining viewers in the wake of the demise of WCW, the WWF found themselves losing their own loyal base. That was until July, when the Invasion pay-per-view became one of the most successful non-major shows in company history. The build was disconnected, the payoff was terrible, but just the idea of WWF going up against ECW and WCW was enough to really sell this thing. Kind of sounds like a familiar situation. And if you fast forward a couple of years, they had 2 very successful pay-per-views cashing in on hardcore ECW nostalgia. That one did not turn out well in the end. And it's true, these events, they didn't result in boom periods. But that completely removes the context of what was happening around them. If in August, Kazuchika Okada is subservient to the bunny, we might be having a different conversation, but we'll wait and see. And it's not a one-to-one comparison, but it's also no accident that the WWE had a ton of pay-per-view success in the early 2010s by bringing in The Rock, someone who specifically catered to their older, more hardcore fanbase. Yes, I'm going to ignore the fact that around the same time, pushing CM Punk kind of wasn't the best thing for business, but oh well. And again, I'll entertain the argument that that wasn't really catering to their hardcore base as much as their lapsed fan base. AEW might be too fresh to have actual lapsed fans, but the data shows that they have an audience that is often in flux. Despite having some loyalists, the viewer seems willing to judge the company based on their output. And let's face it, when we do compare the two companies, AEW has the advantage of not having history, and therefore they can engender more goodwill, and goodwill is something their competitor has squandered over the years. Part of that squandering of goodwill has been taking the hardcore fanbase for granted. For example, Cena and Roman look good on posters. Let's push them for years and years and years. Miz is great on the interview circuit. Make sure he gets more TV time than anybody else. Khali and Omos are tall. The channel surfer won't be able to look away. Or my favorite, NXT took it on the chin to AEW. Let's strip away everything people like about it. Hardcore fanbases are reliable, but they're not permanent, and history has shown them to be actually very valuable. Anyone who's paying attention knows that fans aren't always the consumers. They're often a commodity that is traded between businesses. Fox and NBC Universal are willing to overpay for WWE programming because of that loyal fanbase, a fanbase they've been able to cultivate for nearly half a century. So excuse me for not feigning concern when a company that's less than 5 years old puts in a good faith effort to appease their hardcore fans. Talk to you next time. If you liked that video, there's more where that came from. Go ahead and check out PW Torch's newly relaunched YouTube channel. Don't forget also to follow us on all our social media channels. And most importantly, go VIP.